Aikwe, Neknamalita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be going over my November wrap-up. Apologies for the mess. I just got back to town the day before yesterday. So that's why this is late. That's why everything's kind of, I mean, it was a mess before, but now I'm like truly aware of it. Anyway, so November. What happened in November? I traveled. I went to see my grandparents down in Southern California, which was really enjoyable. I was being safe. I am vaccinated. So that was fun. It was also fairly odd. Very seldomly go down to Southern California. It is hot. I am not used to it being over 80 degrees after mid-November, let alone it being over 80 degrees Fahrenheit and Christmas songs are playing and seeing Christmas tree farms. Okay. It felt like July to me. It was very much a disconnect when I was packing shorts and tank tops while I'm bundled up in a sweatshirt and long pants and socks. Glad to be back though. I'm always happy to be home. But it was nice to get out. So for November, I had a fairly ambitious TBR. If you don't remember, I'll link my November TBR video. Fairly ambitious. There was a lot of smaller books, but there was also a fair number of books. I think it was close to 18 books or something. I read 11 books. However, not a whole lot of them were on my November TBR, but I still think they work. So because I participated in Indigathon hosted by Bear from Brody and Michelle from thorwantsanotherletter. This was the third year that they posted this, and it's just to encourage you to read in books by Indigenous authors. I also participated in Nonfiction November hosted by Allyvee from abookolive, 7th year of Nonfiction November, and I enjoy it because I enjoyed nonfictions. Put in last minute to do the Bloomin readathon hosted by Ellie from Allyvee, and I'll put all the links and the hosts down in the description down below if you want to get more details on any of those. Ultimately though, I had fun. It was a bit of a weird reading month because coming out of October and into November, I still wanted spooky reads. Yeah, I just wanted spooky reads. And I had stopped and started a lot of books thinking, trying to find something that really just caught my attention. I had tried to participate in the Literally Dead Book Club's pick of The Death of Jane Westaway and ended up having to put that on pause because it just wasn't capturing me quick enough. No hard DNFs this month, just a couple pauses for books that I hope to get to eventually. So for the month of November, I read 11 books, which fantastic. I thought that the October number was going to be a fluke. So that makes October and November quantity-wise the best books that I've read. We'll see about quality. With pages read, it was 2,739 and an average rating of 3.63. Ratings were 0 1 stars, 0 2 stars, 2 2.5 stars, 1 3 star, 1 3.5 star, 6 4 stars, 1 4.5 stars, and 0 5 stars. So on a bit of a higher end, which wasn't bad. It also feels weird because a couple of these I didn't feel necessarily comfortable with reading just because I did read quite a few nonfictions, but yeah, we'll get into that. So for genres, I have 6 nonfictions, 5 of which I believe are memoirs. No, 4 are memoirs. One's a biography and one's about nature. And then I also have 2 graphic novels, 1 horror and 1 about food, 1 horror short story collection, and 2 fantasies. One is a fantasy romance, the other a fantasy sci-fi. For audience, we have 8 adult, 2 young adult, and 1 children's. For format, I have 6 audiobooks, 5 physical. Let's just get into the books. First couple are going to be, I've already kind of talked about in a vlog that I did at the beginning of November. I'm hoping to incorporate a bit more vlogs come 2022. I'm still just getting the hang of it and kind of experimenting with them for now. So yeah, bear with me. But my first book of the month was The Lady from the Black Lagoon, Hollywood Monsters and the Lost Legacy of Millicent Patrick by Mallory O'Meara. This is a nonfiction book about Millicent Patrick, who essentially was the creator of the creature from the Black Lagoon. She ended up illustrating and designing him, and for the longest time Hollywood kind of denounced that. There was no hard evidence of it, and people in the sci-fi horror genre still denounce it, saying that Millicent Patrick didn't actually design it. She wasn't the one that like created the costume. However, Mallory O'Meara did the research, did the digging essentially, and found that yes, Millicent Patrick did in fact design the creature from the Black Lagoon. No, she did not create the costume. That's not what designers do. It was really interesting to basically just kind of learn more about Millicent Patrick and how women at the time, I think it was like the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, how they were treated in the entertainment industry in Hollywood as well as in Disney. Millicent Patrick was one of the first women hired for Disney. One thing that I really appreciated about this book in particular was that Mallory O'Meara, as much sexism and as much hardship as Millicent Patrick was having in the entertainment industry, and Mallory O'Meara kind of goes into her own sexism and her own struggles in the entertainment industry as a horror producer in Hollywood. She constantly says that it's harder for BIPOC, LGBTQ, and disabled people that identify as femme or women in the entertainment industry, that that despite their hardships, they are white. So it would have been harder, and is consistently harder, for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ, and disabled people in the entertainment industry, which I really appreciated. Like, yeah, like I can see how some people think it might be like a broken record, but I actually enjoy the fact that like a white woman is constantly saying that to kind of like drive home the point. And also this cover is gorgeous. It's a really, is it picking up? I guess it's picking up pretty well. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy also the illustration on the cover. It was ultimately just a really fun read, really just interesting, and kind of scratched that horror itch I was still feeling coming out of October. Yeah, it was just ultimately really fun. I did listen to this through Libro FM. It was also the Ladies of Horror Fiction book for November, I believe, and I enjoyed it so much that I got a physical copy. I mean, even towards the end of the book, I started tearing up. The end of Millicent Patrick's life. And there's quite a bit of pieces in it that I recognize from traveling through California. Hearst Castle, her father worked on it, which was really interesting, and I wish that I could go visit it now knowing what I do know. So it is very interesting. Obviously does not work for Indigathon. This does work for Nonfiction November. There were prompts for all of the readathons that I participated in. This one in particular definitely works for industry and style. Millicent Patrick was in the entertainment industry. Mallory O'Meara is currently in the entertainment industry. And Millicent Patrick definitely had her own unique style when it came to fashion as well as illustration. So that was pretty cool. For the Bloomin readathon, this works for Tree, which is Tree of Knowledge, just to read a nonfiction book. Cactus, which is a non-needy read. I think it's a relatively short nonfiction book. I also just find nonfictions a fairly non-needy read, depending on the nonfiction. Biographies and memoirs tend to be non-needy, and really quick to get through. My next read was Dear Woman. This is an anthology edited by Elizabeth Lapencia and Weishiot Allyvee. And this is basically a collection from various Indigenous women, artists, writers, poets, put into this anthology focusing on Dear Woman. I thought that some of these were really beautiful. Of course, it varied because of how many different artists are in here. What I made the mistake of doing was thinking that this was going to explain to me more of Dear Woman's history, or more of the cultural relevance, or basically her stories. I have not heard any stories about Dear Woman outside of, I don't know if Elkhead Woman is the same being, but I just don't know. So I made this mistake of going into this thinking that I was going to learn more, and really it's just kind of an ode to Dear Woman, which from what I understand from these stories is a vengeful spirit that lures men who rape women to their dooms and like stomps them to death. Somehow Dear Woman has a relationship with wolves. So I think I would appreciate this anthology a bit more if I learned more about Dear Woman. I haven't heard any stories here locally about her, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. So this got a 3-star for me currently, just because I did enjoy the art in here. I did enjoy the writings. However, there was a disconnect, and I think that disconnect would go away if I knew more about Dear Woman. So I hope to come back to this at some point. This does work for Indigathon, not any one particular prompt. For the Bloomin Readathon, this works for dark, which has dark themes. This does talk about rape. I think this could also work for Lily, which is a book that covers grief and death. This doesn't necessarily go over death, but it does go over grief. The next book I read was Spirit Run, a 6,000-mile marathon through North America's Stolen Land by Noe Alvarez. This was another one I had listened to through Libro FM. I enjoyed it so much that I wanted the physical copy, mostly because it's really pretty to look at as well. I love the colors of it. We are following Noe Alvarez. This is a nonfiction. We are following the author as they kind of talk about the history of their family. They did immigrate from Mexico up to Washington and then get kind of put into this cycle, farming and producer of fruits in Washington, package and distribute fruit, and they tend to use migrants for this job because it's cheap labor. There's consistently ice being called after every season. It just kind of goes on and on. So Noe knew that he didn't want to do this. He ended up getting a scholarship for college. However, when he was in college, there was a disconnect. But then when someone came and started talking about this spirit run that happens every couple of years, that starts in Alaska and ends at the Panama Canal, he was very interested in reconnecting and finding the meaning of what the land means to him. So Noe drops out of college to go on the spirit run. He is a month late, but arrives in Alaska to start the run, and this book kind of talks about his thoughts throughout the whole process of this run. So I thought it was a really interesting read. Know that this does talk about immigration, ICE, bullying, colonization. It was really interesting. I did want to look, I wanted this to be a bit more. Not to say that, he didn't put enough of his life into here. I also know that this is a 6,000-mile run. There's not going to be something interesting at every place he stopped. They did stop within different nations, tribes, and peoples along the way, territories. So at one point he says that they stopped in Hoopa, California, which is a reservation that I grew up on in my childhood and am very familiar with, and I had wanted to know more about what they do, who they see, and it just kind of, he didn't go into it, so it was just kind of but I understand that there's not going to be something interesting at every stop they stopped at. So yeah, it was a really very interesting read, a very short read. Again, for nonfiction, this works, I assume, for industry, because it does talk about the produce industry within Washington and the issues Washington has with migrant families and the lack of labor laws, really. I would also say treatment. This is an Indigenous author. Bloomin readathon. This also works for Tree, which is a nonfiction. I would also say this is a cacti for a non-needy read. Next, I read Anoka by Shane Hawk. This is another Indigenous author. Shane Hawk is Cheyenne and Arapaho. And this is a short story horror collection inspired by Anoka, Minnesota, the Halloween capital of the world. Story collection of horror stories. There were some horror stories that I liked more than others, but ultimately just really enjoyed it and found it really creepy. It gave me the creepy vibes and horror vibes that I had wanted. My favorite, actually, was Transfigured. I really enjoyed that story. I thought it was really strong, and I really enjoyed the fact that it ended with that. So, and would definitely read like a whole book about that story, really. Also, just this is Anoka inspired. So Anoka, Minnesota is multiple territories, but Shane Hawk says that his characters are Dakota. So it is Dakota Anoka inspired, while Shane Hawk is Cheyenne and Arapaho. This also works for Dark, I believe, for a horror story for the Bloomin readathon. Next, I read a nonfiction that I actually had gotten in my advanced listeners copies from, or an advanced listeners copy from Libro FM. I believe it was for October or September. But this was Flesh and Blood, Reflections on Infertility, Family, and Creating a Bountiful Life by N. West Moss. This is a memoir. I did listen to this and then got the physical copy because it is gorgeous. But as well as it was a really impactful book. I feel like there were multiple times where I teared up. Basically, N. West Moss goes into the troubles that she's had leaving a child. Basically, she is preparing for a surgery because she has had some health troubles with her uterus, her ovaries. She has had health issues. And so she is preparing in her older age to go into the surgery so it would hopefully stop these health issues to get a complete hysterectomy. And she kind of reflects on her past with her uterus and her ovaries, of the miscarriages and what that means. What that meant to her and her husband, and how the community or society basically reflected on that as well. It was definitely interesting, and it kind of goes, and she also talks about the healing process after the surgery of having to rely on her mom, basically, again, even though she's in her 50s, and having to kind of revert back to childhood of how her mom used to take care of her. So it was really fun. It was really impactful. I would say content warning for miscarriages, health issues, just as an FYI. This is another nonfiction memoir. So this, I think, works. Treatment, it would work for Nonfiction November. This does not work for Indigathon. It also works for the Tree prompt for Bloomin readathon, also for Cacti, because it was a really easy read. But ultimately, I believe Lily, because it also covers grief and death. So also content warning for, she does talk about multiple family members and basically watching them die as their body deteriorates, but their mind is still sharp. So loved how she spoke about all of her relationships with different family members as well as her husband. It was really sweet, actually, and made me tear up a couple times. So it was a really just well-written book. The next book I read was The Pale-Faced Lie by David Crow. This was a book that was on sale for Libro FM, and this is also a nonfiction memoir. This was interesting. This was really an odd book, mostly, and it's very heavy. So if you are interested at all, I would take care to look at the content warnings. There is domestic abuse, there is domestic violence, there is manipulation. Like, some of the things that David Crow how he talks about his dad growing up is ridiculous. So basically, we are following David Crow's life in that he lived, was it the Navajo reservation? He lived on or near the Navajo reservation with his family. He is the oldest, no, He is the oldest son. He has one older sister above him, 3 younger siblings, I believe. Oh, also mental health. So basically his dad is a con artist, and even though he is able to keep steady jobs, he finds other ways to make them money, and his is very manipulating towards his family, particularly his kids and his wife. David Crow's mom has an undiagnosed mental health issue, and because it's 1970s era, 1960s, it's not treated well, particularly by David Crow's father. So please be aware of that it was very unsettling. She is no doubt going through some PTSD because of how David Crow's father has treated her. So he talks about this, talks about the conflicts, and talks about these different moves that they end up having to make as a family due to different reasons. Whether his father got a new job, at one point his mother ends up convincing them all that they need to move because none of the neighbors like her. Kind of explains the tenuous relationship that David Crow has with his father and his mother, and as he grows up, how it develops and changes. There's also a suicide attempt, so please be aware of that. By mention of suicide attempts, there's so many things going on here, because David Crow basically grows up thinking these certain things about his family, because his father and his mother talk a lot about, this is the family history, this is like this and this is that, we're native. And ultimately, it's up to David Crow to figure out as he's growing up, like, what's true and what's false, because his mom is mentally unwell and his father is a professional liar who ends up roping David into multiple illegal activities. Basically, David Crow spends all of his life thinking that he is Cherokee, and as well as, like, thinking that his dad was a war veteran and all of this and all of that. And he's learning having to relearn everything as he slowly figures out what's true and what's not, particularly as he's managed to get into some interesting political positions within the DC area. It was really fascinating and really interesting and really depressing. It's really heavy topics. So I don't know if it was necessarily enough for me to get a physical copy. I'm still on the fence about that. But it was overall really entertaining and really interesting. So it was wild. It was a wild. For nonfiction, this would be an interesting one for treatment. Treatment of family, treatment of Native Americans. Bloomin readathon. This works for nonfiction. This is also Lotus, a book featuring disability. David Crow does have hearing issues as well as sight issues. He also realizes that he is dyslexic. That's another content warning. His father does not take well to that and has some pretty harmful things to say once he learns about it, so please be wary. Next, I read another nonfiction, and this is Eating Aliens, One Man's Adventures Hunting Invasive Animal Species by Jackson Landers. This is basically what it says. It's a nonfiction. Jackson Landers goes around trying to catch and hunt invasive species in the United States, mostly on the East Coast or South to East Coast. He goes as far as Texas, and then the most of it otherwise is Georgia, Florida, Virginia. It was ultimately an interesting read. I ended up reading it out loud to my partner, who is an avid hunter and fisherman, and he found the bits that he wasn't asleep through fairly interesting. We are going to get a physical copy of this. This was a really interesting read. I enjoyed the fact that Jackson Landers is trying to think of how to curb the population, basically figure out population control for some of these invasive species. And one of the ways to be able to do that is to learn how to eat them. So it was fairly interesting in that he was fishing and hunting for these invasive species and then figuring out how to cook them as well. And what people are doing in the industry to try and get people to eat them, because basically it needs to be on a mass market and able to help curb the population control. So in that respect, it was really interesting. There was some issues that I had at one point. He goes to Florida and talks about Seminole housing, but says it in a way that makes it seem like the Seminoles are gone. And that's not the case. So it was really just kind of frustrating of just like, you're talking about Native people in past tense. You wouldn't, a lot of people think that that wouldn't matter. It does. It really does. Seminole people are still in Florida. And then he just kind of made it worse by comparing these two guys that have Confederate flags up in their hunting lodge, and it's a hunting lodge that one of them has had in their family forever. However, they don't own that land on paper. And so Jackson Landers ends up making a comment at one point to whoever government official ends up having to like kick them off their hunting spot, that it's going to be like Jackson trying to kick out the Seminoles in Florida. I think he was meaning it like, obviously Seminoles are still there, that they like went against Jackson. So like, this is obviously some kind of positive talk, but really I felt it very disrespectful and just a really bad comparison. So it was not good. Left a bad taste in my mouth of just like, really, fucking really? You're going to compare two Confederate guys who are illegally hunting on grounds that aren't theirs, but think it's theirs because it's been in their family, to Seminoles resisting Jackson? No. So that was really just irritating. And then it's throughout the book, I found that there was little things that were irritating me in general. So, for instance, I found that when it came to Jackson Landers trying to hunt and fish these invasive species, he would basically just reach out to buddies or start talking to locals of that area to figure out how to hunt or fish or where to. And then he'd go do it. But when it came to, for instance, cooking them, he would go to these buddies that he already knew. So at one point he couldn't, but like he didn't. To me, it could have been pushed further, because at certain points he wasn't able to get certain invasive species that he ends up talking about. Snakeheads, for instance, he wasn't ever able to catch a snakehead. And it was fairly frustrating because I read this whole chapter on him trying to catch a snakehead only for it to fail. But then he doesn't go into, so for instance, it is said that the Asian community released snakeheads into the wild so that they wouldn't have to keep live snakeheads within aquariums. That would cost a lot. So then why not dig into that further? Was it truly the Asian community? Which Asian community? Why put them into the wild? Why do they need it why do this specific Asian community need live snakeheads? And why not ask them, why not? Let's dig further. So that was something that was really kind of frustrating. I don't know. It was just, there were some things that I really appreciated him saying. Like, there are instances in which invasive species are that the population growth are the fault of humans because or the fault of the government because the government doesn't have a clear system. Just really frustrating to hear about some of the circles that Jackson Landers was going through in order to figure out, like, what is the government doing to curb these populations, and really they're not. So it was a really interesting book. It was also kind of frustrating. I am getting a physical copy. It's mostly for my partner more than me because I was a little frustrated with Jackson Landers' writing. This works for industry as well as treatment for Nonfiction November. This does not work for Indigathon. This works for a nonfiction tree for the Bloomin. Next, I read Fry Bread, a Native American family story written by Kevin Noble Maillard, who I believe he had said that he was Indigenous. I can't remember what people he said he was from, so I apologize. But this was really fun, and that basically this talks about fry bread and talks about the different fry bread flavors and, well, kind of. So basically it goes into the bare basics of fry bread and kind of just says how it relates to being Native American, which I thought was really cool, or Indigenous to America. And what's really cool, I really liked, was that the inner pages have all the names in the original, I think in the U.S. territory. I'm not entirely sure. But what I really liked about it was that they went and called every single one, to whether they were federally recognized, state recognized or not, which a lot are not still, to make sure that they had the appropriate names and how it was spelled. So it was really cool to see like some of the local names in here and how they preferred to be written. Also a lot of them that I haven't recognized before. Just really enjoyed this this book. It was really cute, and the fact that he has notes like towards the end of it, kind of just describing these different ways of just like just different things a part of the book to kind of just explain more about it. So it'd be interesting to see like basically a book of recipes of the fry bread, and how it's made differently from people to people, or tribe to tribe, nation to nation, even from family to family. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like everyone has their own spin on it, so it would be really cool to see like an overall cookbook having all these different recipes or like methods of doing fry bread. I think that'd be really interesting. So it works for the Indigathon for host recommendation as well as Indigenous joy. For Bloominathon, I would say Sun, was it a happy book? There was a brief instance of colonization. The next book I got to, finally, was Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This is a very popular book here on BookTube, and I have to say I was a little disappointed. I apologize. Basically, Cemetery Boys were following Yadriel, who is struggling to prove to his family that he is, in fact, a brujo, which his family is a family of brujos and brujas, brujex, and Yadriel is transgender, and he is having a hard time proving to his family that he is a true brujo. So with his cousin and best friend Maritza, he performs his own quince, Lady Death, to prove himself a brujo. He also ends up summoning a spirit that he hoped was his cousin, and turns out to be the school bad boy. Shenanigans ensue, and Yadriel finds himself not wanting to have to send Julian back to the afterlife. This was cute. It was fun. I loved everything about Dia Los Muertos. The family aspect of Yadriel's family was really enticing and really fun. It was really emotionally impactful considering his strained relationship with his father. That it immediately made me tear up. This made me cry twice just in the beginning of the book. But then it felt like it kind of lost me. I feel like this is kind of just YA in general, in that I feel like it's over dramatic, and that there were different times that it was over dramatic a lot in here. And I can't tell if it's just Aidan Thomas's writing, because I found this with Lost in the Neverwoods as well, that there were just aspects of this book that I thought we were in a time crunch, that we needed to do this thing really quickly to get it done because there's a time limit, but here we are gallivanting about and having fun. So it just kind of was just like, wait, what? I thought we were in a hurry. I thought we were needing to do this important thing, and here we are going to party. I feel very like old adult saying this, but there was also like a moment in here where Yadriel ends up stealing a car, and there was no repercussions for it. So it was just kind of like, but. So I also had problems with Maritza. So if I didn't have a problem with Maritza, I ended up having a problem with Yadriel. I wasn't convinced of their friendship. There were multiple times where like Maritza was giving Yadriel a hard time, and to the point where Yadriel was physically uncomfortable. Like physically looked uncomfortable, and Maritza just smiled and like just kind of laughed at it. And it's just like, excuse me, No. Ultimately, it was very cute. It was just kind of disappointing to me. I don't know if it was just because it was overhyped. I did find the writing very beautiful. I found the family aspect very lovely. I really just, it was very homey and cozy to me. I enjoyed it. Not only Yadriel's family, but Maritza's family. I loved Yintah, by the way. She was a hoot. I really enjoyed the fact that Aidan Thomas went into so much detail about Brewhex and that it's more than just Mexico. It's the Caribbean. It's like all these different varieties. Not varieties. That sounds so bad, but like there's much more to that, and I really enjoyed it. I predicted the antagonist, so. I don't, like I said, I don't know if it's like the result of it being overhyped or what, or if it's just YA and I'm just not clicking with it. There was just issues I had with it. They are my own. It was still a very lovely book. I don't believe this works for Indigathon, but I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't see how Aidan Thomas identifies in terms of culturally outside of Latinx. So I apologize if that's even wrong. For this, obviously doesn't work for nonfiction, but for the Bloomin-a-thon, this works for B, which is a book on my shelf that has a lot of buzz. This is a very popular book on BookTube. This also works for Green Carnation, a book with LGBTQ plus themes and or is written by someone in the community. This also works for Tulips, which is a book featuring love. Next, I read A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcy Little Badger. I have a full review coming out for this. We'll see if I get it up before this video comes up or after. If not, whatever, I will link it above and below. But this one is Darcy Little Badger's newest release, and we are following Nina or Nina. I can't recall which it is. I think while I was reading it, it was Nina, because I know someone named Nina. So I wanted something different. So Nina was the whole, but we were following Nina as well as Ollie, who is a cottonmouth. So Nina lives on Earth and knows that there's something more to Earth that she's trying to figure out. And she's trying to figure that out by trying to transcribe and translate her great-great-grandmother's story that she told her basically on her deathbed. That was a mix of Spanish and Lipan. Nina herself is a huge storyteller, and this is like a futuristic Earth. There's technologies that aren't quite here yet. There's also climate disasters that are on the verge of happening here. And then we are also following Ollie, who's a cottonmouth kid who lives in the reflective world. Ollie is, like all snakes, kicked out of his family. Kicked out of his family house, has to go figure out how to live on his own and meet some friends along the way, and as he figures out how to basically live on his own in this world. But one day, one of Ollie's friends ends up becoming extremely ill due to something that happened on Earth. So Ollie and his friends have to go to Earth. Ollie and Nina have to help each other out to figure out what's going on with Ollie's friend. This ultimately was fun. It was a little disappointing. Not to say that I didn't enjoy this. This took me a bit to get into. I did enjoy this. Ultimately, I really do enjoy it. I enjoyed Darcy Little Badger's writing immensely. I loved The Lots Away last year. This just wasn't there. It left a lot of questions for me. So it's like ultimately, I wanted more. Have more information in my full review of this. Ultimately, yeah, was just kind of, it was okay. I wanted more. This works for Indigathon, and then obviously does not work for Nonfiction November. I would say B, a lot of people are starting to get a lot of buzz going around this book. I would also say Daffodil, a book about friendship. I love the friendship aspects that Ellie had with all the other animal people. I would find this a snail a bit of a slow burner. I'd also say Fertilizer, one that will nourish my soul, as well as Water, read from an author you've been thirsty to read more of. Darcy Little Badger, I will continue reading her work. I love it. Yes, this one was a bit disappointing to me, but I will still continue to read her works. And my final book for November was Aminus Put Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. This was intense. So this is an urgent and visceral work that asks essential questions about the treatment of Native people in North America while drawing an intimate on intimate details of her own life experience with intergenerational trauma. This is a nonfiction memoir by Alicia Elliott. I thought it was very beautiful reading. I actually was listening to this through Libro. I do have a physical copy coming in. It's a beautiful cover. Both covers. I had a hard time choosing which one I wanted, but ultimately settled with this one. It was one of those books too that like came to me at the right time, because as I was listening to this book, I found that a lot of what Alicia Elliott was saying was something that's been building up in my mind for a while. There were just definite elements to it that I was like, yes, okay, yes, perfect. Because she talks about the relationship between the Native people and North America, not just the U.S. government, but Canadian government as well as other people. So be wary of that going into this book, that it does have content warnings for domestic abuse, domestic violence, more mental health issues that I don't think are treated quite right. There was also a chapter that she went into that covered lice, and I struggled through that one after I've had lice twice in my life, and I swear like it made me want to go get some Rid and just go through my hair with a fine-tooth comb, because I could not deal with it. Even now, just thinking about it, it makes everything itch. So be wary of that. I wish I had a bit of a warning on that one. Colonization. She also goes through a couple of court issues that had come up that resulted in acquittals. Basically, it felt like justice wasn't served. So, yeah, I ultimately really enjoyed this book. It was definitely heartbreaking. I want to reread it immediately, because I read this through Libro FM, which was completely fine. I absolutely loved it. I love the narration of it. Kayla Garcia, I think, who narrates most female Indigenous memoirs. Like, I really enjoyed it. My issue, though, is that because I was listening to it not at work, and then I was listening to it as I was traveling down south. So it was very off and on, and I would like to be able to just reread it continuously without these pauses in between, because there were definite moments, particularly when I was on the plane, that I didn't quite catch, or ended up like falling asleep during certain parts. Not because of any fault of the book, it was just I was on a plane. I feel like it's something that I'll definitely want to reread, and it's become one of those books. And after this reread, I feel like I would definitely give it like 5 stars. Right now I'm giving it a 4.5 because I just want to refresh myself. But already this book is a must read for everybody, because there were so many aspects in this book that I completely agree with. The abusive relationship that Native Americans have with the Canadian and the U.S. government, as well as its people, the gaslighting, the bullying, the everything. I just really appreciated this book. It was a really good book to end Indigenous Heritage Month on. Definitely works for Indigathon. This also works for Nonfiction November. I would say for treatment, for sure. You could even say industry, because I feel like the US and Canadian government definitely make an industry out of gaslighting people. For Bloomin, read-a-thon. Free for nonfiction. Lily, a book that covers grief and death. There were multiple moments of that. Alicia Elliott does talk about missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, as well as multiple murders. So please be aware of that. I do feel like this would fit for Fertilizer as well, a book that will nourish my soul, as well as Ladybug, a book that is cute on the face of it but will ruin your life. I don't feel like it ruined my life, but I feel like you definitely have to be in the right mindset. It did have a major effect on me. So those are the books that I have read in the month of November. If you have read any of these, please let me know your thoughts down in the description down below. Please, no spoilers. What a month. I think in terms of quality wise, was definitely higher than October. So in terms of quality versus quantity, I think I was doing pretty good. Let's hope I can keep that up for December as well. I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I will see you in another video very soon. Cheers.